Diva cups, menstrual discs, bleeding time care in general, and some physiological considerations specifically for the discs and the Diva cup. So I know that the Diva cup is beloved by many. I used to feel that way myself. I used it all the time. I used it every cycle. I was able to collect my blood and feed it to my plants or do whatever. And there are, however, some physiological concerns of why I no longer recommend them, and I want to go through those here. And then we'll also get into what I do use and why, and just some ways to be supportive of your cycle in general. So, as always, I like to start with the structure. So, if we're thinking about a Diva cup from a structural perspective, we're inserting it up our vaginal canal. And within our vaginal canal, it's sitting close to the cervix. The Diva cup is spreading out, meaning it's pressing out into the walls of the vaginal canal, but it's also suctioned. That suction is pulling down specifically on our cervical tissues. We know, if you follow me or if you're interested, that I'm into support and lift of our cervix whenever possible, or more so just mitigating any symptoms of pelvic descent, right? Because that's prolapse, our pelvic organs moving from a more supported to a less supported position within the pelvic bowl. So if we have our cervix being drawn down by the suction of the cup, specifically if we're doing that for, I don't know, 12 hours a day for maybe up to 25% of our life, that's a lot of pressure put on our cervical tissues. And that ultimately, I think, is contributing to symptoms of pelvic descent. So that's a big no-no for me. Specifically, if you're dealing with any symptoms of pelvic organ prolapse or have had a baby or struggle with sort of low back pain, incontinence, constipation, anything like that, that's adding tension within our pelvic bowl and canister and pulling down on the cervix due to suction, I think it's a big no-no. Also, this happens to a lesser degree with the menstrual discs, right? Which aren't as strong as suction. They more have this sort of spring where they move, not an actual spring, but they have, they press outward to sit within the upper vaginal canal. So it's not as much of a suction, but there is still some degree of that drawing down. And so I don't like those either. The other main consideration, if we're thinking about the structure of our vaginal integrity and how that relates to the discs and the Diva cup, is the actual pressure outward of the cup. So our fascial tissue or our connective tissue responds and changes shape in regards to pressure over time, right? That's what dictates the shape of our fascia. So if we are, again, putting consistent outward pressure on the internal vaginal canal over time, outward pressure either from the cup or the discs, that is going to have an effect on our fascial tissue. When we see, and that effect on our fascial tissue can also lead to symptoms of pelvic like descent or pelvic heaviness. We want a fluid, buoyant, mobile tissue rather than pushed out in one spot, which means it's not moving as much right there. It's going to have effects all through the fascial chain. Our healthy fascia should be sort of gliding and sliding over itself, and anything that's specifically holding it out in a certain position and not allowing for natural mobility, however subtle it might be, in my opinion, is not supporting the optimal integrity of our pelvic health and our vaginal tissues, or really any tissues in the body. So between the suction and the effect on our fascia, and then the fact that we know that suction and fascial adhesion are some of the primary postural precursors to prolapse and other symptoms of pelvic dysfunction, right off the bat, that's a big no-no for me for the cups and the discs. The other thing that I think is incredibly noteworthy is the healthful and rejuvenating effect of our menstrual blood and what effect that has on our vaginal microbiome. We are designed to have our menstrual blood really bathe the internal vaginal tissues. So the vaginal microbiome, similar to the gut microbiome, has a forever fluctuating and supportive, ideally, sort of ratio of different virons and bacteria and fungus and other cell matter that is in this incredible sort of concert that helps keep our, helps keep our tissues healthy, helps us fend off infection, that kind of thing. The ability for our menstrual blood to bathe those tissues is part of the cycle to keep our vaginal microbiome rejuvenated and balanced. You've probably heard the phrase that the vagina is self-cleaning. I don't like that phrase because it insinuates that the vagina is dirty and therefore needs cleaning, which I don't agree. However, the idea that it is sort of self-balancing, I do agree with. And one of the major ways in which that occurs is allowing our menstrual blood to bathe our internal vaginal tissues. So if you're collecting all of that blood within a cup or within a menstrual disc, you're not having that same rejuvenation effect. You're not having that same bathing effect. And in that way, I think that it can add to incidence of infection or just sort of a lack of overall health and vibrancy within our vaginal microbiome. A few other things I think are noteworthy to mention in regards to, so, okay, those are really convenient. How do I care for my vaginal health? How do I care for myself during my cycle? I mentioned in a recent post that I also wouldn't utilize like just regular tampons or even, just like classic pads. Now, I will say I will use them, but I always try to veer towards the ones that are, or like utilize the ones that are organic cotton, or that certainly at least don't have chemical additives, which is almost all of them. And so really seeking out the like as natural as you can utilize, I think is going to be of utmost importance for the same reason of the disruption of the vaginal microbiome. Imagine if you're actually inserting like a scented tampon that is like laced full of plastic directly into your incredibly absorbent mucosal membranes within the vaginal canal. Like that is incredibly disruptive, and I don't actually think that will be supportive for your long-term vaginal health. The other consideration about tampons specifically is and this is, I use them on occasion, but I generally try not to use them as like my go-to every day. If I'm like in a situation where tampons really only going to be the thing, then okay, I get that, and I'll choose an organic one at that time. But otherwise, when you're inserting something into your vaginal canal, that creates a subtle tension. We all know that that's how a tampon is physically held within the vaginal canal. However, we're actually interested in the opening of those tissues and everything softening and relaxing. And when we have that excess tension within our vaginal canal or even within our pelvic bowl more broadly, we also, that excess tension can also relate to symptoms of sort of menstrual cramps or just overall congestion in the pelvic bowl. So the idea that we are, maybe wearing a tampon that entire time that's creating that, however subtle constriction, it's sort of the opposite of what physiologically needs to occur, which is a softening of our internal vaginal tissues and the tissues of our pelvic bowl. One thing I've heard from a lot of women, and it was definitely true for myself, I get significantly worse menstrual cramps if I'm wearing tampons. If I don't wear tampons, it's way, way better. And I think this has to do with that subtle muscular constriction that is a part of, wearing a tampon in the first place. So now what? What do I actually do? I mean, I tried to use menstrual bleeding underwear. Now, these all can also be full of plastics and additives. I know there's some class action lawsuits going on about that. So do your research and sorry about that. So do your research. And again, natural fibers. I know that there are some women who are making incredible products out there that are just essentially layers of flannel and cotton that are built into our panties. And that having those be blood absorbent has been a game changer for me. That's usually what I use. I also do use reusable pads, reusable cotton pads. So same thing, you just snap them at the bottom around your underwear, and then I rinse them out. That I think is just what has been utilized by women all the time forevermore, is just things that actually collect the blood that you can rinse and wash. But the other thing I have utilized in the past is a menstrual sponge, which is just like an actual natural sea sponge that you would insert like a tampon. So but those then need to be washed and like rather than disposed of. However, if I know and I can plan, that's something else that I would utilize as a natural fiber that still allows that sort of bathing of the tissues within my internal vaginal canal. So all of this to be said, if you are I love my Diva cup, I love my menstrual disc, I never want to give it up user, these are some considerations for you to think for long-term health and longevity. One day is not necessarily going to change, everything about the future of your pelvic health, but consistent use all day, every day, for every cycle, for your, the entirety of your, bleeding time as a woman, I think it's not a great choice. And there are so many others that we can utilize to be centering not just our ability to like do a bunch of stuff and be active during our cycle, but actually how we care for our cycle, being a part of how we support our long-term pelvic health and longevity rather than just manage our bleeding time. Oh, also, if you do like this or have any questions, you can totally respond to this email. You can also add comments below, and I will get back to you.